Welcome back at part two here on Sheffield Live TV with a weekend of football to look forward to, and we'll round up any other sporting action. It's beginning to get back into action as well with James Gregg during this. Ian Danter of TalkSport rejoins us for part two, as does Paul Devlin, the former Sheffield United and Birmingham City, among many others, players and many others, including non-league teams, both before his league career and after his league career. And your sort of background, if you like, and your earthy nature as a person, you're rooted there, reflects Chris Wilder. We're just top and tail the chat that we began in part one about Chris Wilder. He's worked his way all the way up. And that's something that's very laudable and I think quite significant, Paul.
Yeah, very much so. He's gone out and done his apprenticeship, and as a player, he played in the lower leagues as well as the top league. So I think it's something that stands you in good stead. In good stead, if you can see both sides of the game. You know, it's great at the moment. He's getting the glamour and glitz of the Premier League, but he'll tell you himself them cold nights down at Oxford and Northampton when they're going away to the less glamorous places, Southend on a Tuesday night or something like that. So, yeah, you know, I think it's all character building, isn't it? And stands you in good stead for the future.
One thing he asked me never to mention to him again, which I raised once on this show, is that, whisper it, he's never been sacked as a manager. He's done 17 or 18 years now. That is remarkable. He has never been sacked. And lots of managers say, well, you don't start learning the job until you're sacked. So this is why we don't ever... He breaks the mould on that, Ian, as well.
Yeah, well, they used to say, didn't they? That was one certainty that you'd get sacked as a manager. I mean, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, that's fantastic, and long may it continue.
Yeah, indeed. But it is a remarkable thing in the game, the modern game, as we are now. Just bring James Gregg in quickly here, because we've had to admit, James, that we are recording this, and that by the time people watch it, we'll know how the Blades got on at Villa in that opening game. Unless you want to be sort of carefree enough to risk saying congratulations to Chris Wilder.
What to kind of predict the result, Alan? As I know, actually, when we were discussing that we were going to pre-record this, that you know, you kind of said to me, "Do not do that," and I said, "Okay, why is that?" And you had a prediction experience, shall we say?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Of your own, when you were a young reporter. Are you willing to tell the viewers about that?
Very, very, very early in my career, I had to write a column on Chesterfield Football Club for a newspaper in Chesterfield, and they were going so well that I thought, you know what, I had to write it ahead of a game. They were playing away at Reading, and I decided to write it as if they'd won and take the risk and say, you know, another marvellous victory. And they lost 4-0 subsequently. And the manager of Chesterfield was, you know, despite his disgruntlement at defeat, was highly amused at my embarrassment. And I would never repeat that. It's a ridiculous, reckless thing to do. We did promise we'd talk about Neil Warnock in this half. My goodness, it's amazing how many people who join us here do talk about this guy, because he's been around so long. Had a memorable chat with Dean Windass about him, spectacular fallout and spectacular falling back in with Neil. I must admit, criticism of Neil is very few and far between from players who've played for him. What's your take, Dev?
No, I've got nothing but respect for Neil. He gave me my chance at 19 years of age, from young kid playing non-league in Birmingham, to make my debut in the old First Division for Notts County. So he took a punt on me, Neil. All them years ago at Notts County. Then I had a couple of seasons under him at Sheffield, and probably the 2000 season where I won Player of the Year, probably. That and probably the 97-98 season at Blues were my two best years in football. So, nothing. Listen, I had my fair shares of ups and downs and fallouts with him. That's Neil. But he never bore a grudge. As long as I was doing okay for him, he'd stand by me. So I know you'll get players and people with varying opinions of him, but I've got nothing but respect for Neil Warnock. He also been linked with the Birmingham City job as well. I wouldn't mind seeing Neil down there, but no, I nothing but fond memories of Neil.
Yeah, Neil till the end of the season at Birmingham, Ian. Does that figure for you?
Well, it's an option. I'm not sure whether it suits Neil geographically, seeing as he's based down in the southwest these days, down Plymouth way. But certainly, as Devs rightly says, as a man who can pull people together. Entries, you guys in Sheffield, you know so much more about Neil Warnock than any of the rest of us ever will. But I've had very few experiences of meeting. I'm having to thank for my first ever football commentary, because I was at Walsall one day working for BRMB and Capital Gold in Birmingham when the Battle of Bramall Lane took place. And because of that abandonment, I had to pick up commentary from the Walsall against Barnsley as a Cub reporter. So I have Neil Warnock to thank for my commentary career getting underway in earnest.
Brilliant. Great story. Yeah, great story. But he is a character. Don't worry about him, the fact being down in Cornwall, because he managed Rotherham and they survived in the Championship under him when he was living in Cornwall. And the great secret is delegation. He doesn't turn up. I think the lads who played there said they only saw him once or twice during the course of a week. He'd say the right words in the dressing room, make people feel 10 feet tall, they'd win, and then he'd go back to Cornwall again.
I don't know what Devs thinks, but the factor that we have here in any appointment, whether it's Neil Warnock, is the board that works with him. Because the board that we've got at St Andrews at the moment is tricky to use. That's about as clean as I can be. They're a tricky board to deal with. And Gary Monk found that out for himself, and that's why he became persona non grata. So but then, is there a stronger personality than Neil Warnock in the game? I very much doubt it, to deal with those sorts of situations.
Well, he proved at Cardiff, couldn't he, that he could deal with, shall we say, tricky owner situations. He's pretty good at that. But Nigel Clough, we started with on this programme, and the link that he has to Birmingham. Now, Nigel is probably quite rightly very, very particular about who he works for and a relationship with the board. And he's just had a great rapport with Ben Robinson at Burton. And that makes me wonder whether Nigel Clough would risk a relationship of that sort. Paul, any thoughts on that basis?
Listen, but if you're from Birmingham, you know the size of Birmingham City Football Club. You know, I'm biased, obviously, the same way Dants is, but it's a big football club, and you know the chance to manage clubs like that doesn't come along very often. So you can look at it one or two ways. You know, will I get the chance to manage a big club like Blues that's got all the potential in the world? You know, we've been in the top flight in the not too distant past, or do you look and you think, well, maybe I'm not happy about things behind the scenes, as Dants said. People question the board, they're not the greatest communicators in the world. So I don't know. I mean, it's how bad he wants the job. Like I say, it's a big club to if you're offered it to turn it down.
One anomaly that's cropped up because of coronavirus is that Neil Warnock happens to be over 70. And, for instance, the Fulham manager, Roy Hodgson. Well, if he's healthy and he's happy to do it, is there a barrier to it? I don't know. But
I think the thing with Neil, of course, of his age, his experience, obviously he doesn't need the money anymore. I think if he'd go in there and he would just do it 100% on his terms, otherwise he wouldn't take the job. I think that's the luxury that people like Neil Warnock have got, that have been around the block that long, and managed that many clubs that are not, the financial side of it's always a part, but Neil doesn't need to work another day in his life, so he can afford to go into interviews and say, well, this is how I want to do it, A, B, C. If you don't like it, I won't have the job.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd be very, very happy to take on a job like that if I need to get out of the house, because it's in his blood. Empty stadiums, cracky. How much is it going to affect the players? Albeit it's going to be the same for both teams. And I'll come to Ian after you've had a word on this, Paul, for the journalist angle and the reporters and commentators angle on it. Paul, as a player, how would you have felt, do you think? And did you ever experience anything like this?
As a player, I personally would probably find that the most difficult thing. You know, people are on about the lads' fitness and that. The fitness thing wouldn't have been a problem. You keep yourself ticking over. Obviously, the lads have been back in training a few weeks. But the atmosphere, that would have been a problem too. I'm thinking now as an ex-player, I would have hated it. I would have absolutely hated that. I mean, obviously, when you're used to playing reserve games and do one man and his dog there, it was, you know, that wasn't great. But it was a means to an end. You were either coming back from injury or you were out the team, looking to break into the team. But I don't ever think, as a first-team player at any of the clubs that I played at, that I experienced anything like that. So, personally, I would find that more difficult than anything.
And some players, I think, need a crowd. And other players, conversely, I mean, Michael Vaughan, adapting this to cricket, appeared here a few weeks ago. And he said, yeah, some players need a crowd, but you might find that other players, you know, who are talented, but sometimes inhibited, might flourish in these situations. That's strange, but that could be true, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's someone who's not having a particularly good run of form, and that's out the window now because we haven't played for that long. But you know, if you're not playing too great and there's one or two getting on your back, you know, it's great to go and play an away game now and again because you know obviously you've not got 20,000 people sort of looking to criticise you. But I don't think if I asked all my football mates, I think if I asked any of them, you know, they'd hate to play in front of an empty ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian, it's not going to be an empty press box. That's the only area of football stadiums that aren't going to be empty. And there'll be guys like you and I rattling away, and the only things we'll be able to hear in the background are fellow reporters and commentators. It's going to be bizarre, isn't it? Have you ever experienced like it?
No, the only time I've ever commentated on a behind closed door game is one off tube, as we call it in the trade, as in you're watching it on a television from, say, back in London or something like that. So, but as Debs says, you know, it's a training ground thing. You know, you hear the shouts of man on pass or whatever. It really interests me, and I've been in the Bundesliga whilst that's kicked off, see whether there's any evidence of this. But I was chatting with Matt Holland about this a week ago, and he talked about the culture of training ground players, those players who showed the most beautiful, sublime touches or brilliant defending and grace under pressure on the training ground, but could never quite consistently bring that to a stadium full of people. He did name a couple of names, and I won't embarrass them by, you know, Matt mentioned a few that fell into that category, that had all the skill or the nous in the world that they could have on the training ground. But when it came to being in front of a crowd, something went missing. Devs will know a few of those guys as well, I'm sure.
Great point.
Yeah, very, very much so. You know, they tended to be the lads that, you know, were never really regular players in the team. They're sort of drifting in and out for that reason. That, you know, once Saturdays come, match day come, and there was a little bit of pressure and people on you and expectations, they couldn't really handle it. But in training, they'd be the best player. You know, conversely to that, I also remember right at the end of my career playing with Steve Claridge at Warsaw for Kevin Broadhurst, who was managing a great friend of mine. And Claridge was the opposite. He would not try a leg in training. He wouldn't run around. And then at the end of training, he'd do a 12-minute run as fast as he possibly could round the pitches. And I'd just say, Cleggy, why don't you just run around in training? But he was the opposite. He wouldn't move. And then all of a sudden at the end, he'd do this run as fast as he could. But, you know, you look at Steve Claridge in the games. I mean, he was, you know, a bit like Robbie Savage. He was perpetual motion, chased every lost cause, never stopped running. So you do get the good trainers and the bad trainers, but ultimately you've got to do it at 3 o'clock on a Saturday.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all different, and I don't know how much training, Ian Danter, you've done for your return to commentary duties.
Well, what can you do? You have to pitch commentary as naturally as you can once you're in that environment. Nothing's prepared any of us for how players react, or indeed how commentators react. I mean, you know, normally when a goal goes in, as a commentator, you're fighting against the sheer volume of noise that surrounds you. And there's grounds that are worse than that than others. When you go to Ellen Road and you work at Leeds United, when a goal goes in there, you can't hear yourself think half the time. So you have to, you know, raise your voice to cope with that. So there will be a natural change in pitch, I think, for every commentator. But it's not lost on me, Alan, the fortunate nature that I have of being one of the few people allowed into the stadia for these games. And I accept the responsibility that comes with that, that your commentary, therefore, has to be even better than normal because there's so many more people relying on your accuracy as a commentator. Yeah. That's pressure, but that's absolutely right. I should have that pressure on me. I've got to, for the Colchester and Exeter fans that can't be there on Thursday and don't have access to television and want to listen to it on the wireless, that's my job. I've got to, you know, try and alleviate that huge disappointment that they have that they're not there by making them feel like they're there.
Yeah, this is a terrific point. You know, I'm restarting at Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday v Nottingham Forest, and delighted to be doing that game for TalkSport on Saturday. But I fought shy of going on social media and saying, great, I'm going to, you know, this game on Saturday, because I'm aware that people will look at it and think, well, all right for you, mate. I can't go, you know. So this is where you're right. You know, we are very, very lucky and privileged to be doing the job we are and go.
You just pitch it the way you can. I mean, you have to be honest and say that you're really looking forward to getting back. You'd be lying if you said you weren't looking forward to being back at a stadium. That everybody would say that. But yes, you don't. At the same time, you don't sort of thumb your nose at people and whatnot. There is a balance to be struck, definitely. But my natural demeanour means I feel very, very privileged to have the opportunity. I have so many games to cover in the next 90 odd days or whatever it is that we've got to finish off the season in. Whether it's Colchester on Thursday or whether it's Brighton. Do you know what? I'd like to go to St Andrews. I hope I get the chance to go to St Andrews and do a commentary in front of an empty stadium. It'll be that'll be a hit. That'll be a trick for me. I'd enjoy that.
Yeah. Before we go, we must ask about the picture behind you. James Gregg is far too young to recognise it, and it seems I'm far too old to recognise it. We'll get you in to identify before we go. I also ask Paul Devlin, names sometimes sum up players. To me, you're Devlin by name and Devlin by nature. I always thought that when I saw you playing. Is that a fair comment, do you think? Or
yeah, I think so. I've been called far worse, so yeah, I'll take that one. But yeah, it's similar. I'm very much off the pitch like I was on the pitch, so 100 miles an hour and a little bit aggressive now and again. I've not got the great patience and attention span in the world, but I like to think I've calmed down a little bit since I was playing. But my missus will probably say opposite.
Listen, let me tell you what, we were lucky to get Dev back when we did at Birmingham when Steve Bruce arrived in that season when we won promotion. And Devs will play it down a bit, but that whole squad, and one of the greatest honours of my life was to host a dinner 10 years after Birmingham had won promotion. There was a big dinner at Edgbaston Cricket Club. Stan Lazaridis flew all the way in from Australia. I think other players came in from other parts of the world. Olivier Tebbley showed up. And Devs was a massive, massive part of that extraordinary turnaround from the Francis side in 2001 that was losing its way to the Steve Bruce side that won promotion. And Devs was a massive, massive part of that. And then get to the Premier League and he scores one of the best goals I've ever seen at St Andrews against Leeds United.
Yeah, right. Birmingham's first Premier League goal was scored by Paul Devlin. Before we go, Steve Bruce, Trevor Francis, and that picture behind you after James Gregg and the roundup.
Yeah, just a few things to mark your card. Obviously, I'm not going to try and predict Sheffield United's return result against Aston Villa later on as we record this, or yesterday as you watch this at home. Meanwhile, Sheffield Wednesday, of course, they're restarting as well. They're offering supporters the chance to be at the final 5 home games of the season. Well, kind of, sort of. They're the latest club to offer fans the chance to buy cardboard cutouts of themselves, and they'd be present in the North Stand at Hillsborough during all the remaining home games, with supporters then being able to collect their memento upon the season's collection. So that's all good. It's 25 quid, and it involves supporters uploading a photo of themselves wearing match day gear, and then they can pop it onto a seat at the North Stand. So that's quite amusing. Last week on the programme, I was mentioning local snooker boy, Ashley Carty. Of course, that was the first professional sport to return. He had a magnificent run in that first event back. He beat Neil Robertson and he beat Ken Doherty in the group stages of that Players' Championship returning. He did get knocked out at the semi-final stage, but a magnificent effort for the world number 83 for Ashley Carty. Bit of rugby league news. Sheffield are going to host 5 nations in the 2021 Rugby League World Cup. And also Ralph Rimmer, you might notice, gave £16 million to Super League and Championship clubs, which will help the Sheffield Eagles absolutely no end. And we'll finish off with Matthew Fitzpatrick. Again, local boy in the PGA Tour restart event last week, and he finished in a tie for 32nd. Well done, Matt.
Okay. And, oh, by the way, well done you as well. Hole in one last weekend, James. Yeah?
Yeah. You know, this is my 3rd one, so it's becoming just part and parcel of me playing golf now.
Hey, and he does it when there's no clubhouse open as well. That's the best time to do it. He doesn't even have to put his hand in his pocket.
Exactly. It was a beautiful afternoon.
Fantastic. Well done, James. Yeah, we've only got a few minutes left. 2 characters, 2 managers that we know well up here and highly respect them, both very different individuals, Steve Bruce and Trevor Francis. You had mixed experiences there, Paul.
Yeah, as people chalk and cheese. I mean, I love Bruce. I played with him for 18 months when he came as a player at Blues. His first job as a manager was Sheffield, and I was at Sheffield when he had that job, and he brought me back to Blues for that fantastic spell that Dants was just on about, and got on fantastically well with Steve Bruce. Trevor is God at St Andrews. Wanted desperately to love him and get on with him, but we just never really hit it off. You know, I wasn't a Trevor signing. Although I did really well, you know, in the first 18 months he was there, I always felt that long term he didn't really have a lot of faith in me, and ultimately that ended in me going to Sheffield United. So, you know, that happens. Managers come in and they want their own signings. There wasn't many really of the Barry Fry era. Probably Martin Granger was the only one that lasted long term, that lasted under Trevor, but. You know, as Dants will tell you, he's so well thought of at St Andrews. It was really disappointing when I realised that he didn't actually really rate me that highly.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's part of the job that he's got to make an honest decision. I found him a really dignified man. Just finally, your thoughts on those 2, Ian, and then you can just talk briefly about what's behind you there.
Well, Trevor was my first hero as a player. I first went to watch Birmingham like 74. I was just over 6 years of age. And Trevor was kind of at his peak then. He was, you know, gliding over these horrible pitches they used to play on as though there was barely a divot there to encounter. But as a manager, I mean, I obviously I never dealt with him as a manager, but from the perspective as a supporter, when he came in 1996, having had a good spell at Wednesday, of course, you know, he'd done well taking over from Big Ron, and we wanted it so badly for him. We wanted promotion for ourselves. Yes, of course, as supporters, we've been away since the mid-'80s, but we wanted it so badly for Trevor because you didn't want players to be tarnished in any by shifting from player to manager. And with the succession of playoff semi-final defeats that we suffered, Watford, Barnsley was particularly tough to take when we got walloped at home in the first leg. Nicky Barmby was outstanding, and you know we never recovered in the second leg. And the penalties at Preston taken at the wrong end as far as Trevor was concerned. Just everything went against him. And then, you know, Steve Bruce came in. I met him for the first time. I think we had to beat Sheffield United the last day of the season to get into the playoffs to be sure of our place. And he did a fans forum a couple of days before, and I couldn't believe how calm he was because there were loads at Burnley. I think were trying to get into the playoffs as well as us. He was so calm as a man. Whether he was like that with Devs and the players in the run up to I don't know, but he came across as a man who had a very cool, calm perspective about how to get Birmingham into the Premier League. And those early years in the Premier League, beating Villa home and away, season after season, absolutely bloody glorious.
Bloody glorious is a great two words to go out on. Just in 10 seconds, behind you there, just tell us.
That is a painting of the American rock band Kiss, my favourite band of all time, that a guitarist friend of mine painted for me. It's a proper oil painting that rendered from a photograph when they were on top of the Empire State Building in the mid-70s, when they were massive.
Right, massive. There you go. Sheffield Wednesday fans. They'll be fans of you now for saying that. That's a big word. A big word.
No me from that.
Yeah, a word that I can't. I'm not allowed to use very often. But it remains me to thank you all for a highly entertaining, best part of an hour. James, Gregg, it looks to me like you're sitting on a Graham Norton style chair in a studio there, and it's going to tip back, and you're going to go backwards.
You can press the button for me, Alan. send me backwards.
Yeah, very, very soon. Thanks very much indeed. Ian Danter, talk to you on the wireless, and Paul Devlin. Been fantastic to hear all your stories and all your memories and your chat about Sheffield football generally. Brilliant, boys. Thanks so much for you guys watching, and we'll hope to see you again next week. See you then. Bye-bye.